My name is Lewis Gordon. I teach in the philosophy department at the University of Connecticut, where I'm also an affiliate in Caribbean and Latin American studies and Asian American studies and Jewish studies. I'm also honorary professor at the Unit for the Humanities at the university currently known as Rhodes, and I hold a European Union chair in philosophy at the University of Toulouse. Now, what I'd like to talk about is connected to what my work animates from. My work connects to the question of the human being's relationship to reality. Now that sounds like something very abstract, but it comes down to a very simple point. It's really amazing, in fact extraordinary, that consciousness emerged. And when I say this, I'm saying it in a way to really address the fact that there are people who debate, they argue around these issues, but it's really bizarre if I'm talking to you to be debating whether you are conscious. So we'll start from that premise, and among the things that are conscious are creatures we know as human beings. Now we human beings really have a tricky relationship to reality because we can not only question reality, we can question ourselves, and in that, we have a relationship to what we can call freedom, and in that relationship, we also question how we go about studying these things. This led to me doing a lot of work in what's called existentialism. And I know when people think of existentialism, they think of brooding figures and angst and all of that stuff. But the way I look at existentialism is that it gets to the question of what fundamentally is involved in being a human being. Now, this question, as straightforward as it may be, has huge implications for the world we live in, because we live in a world in which many human beings are being pummeled, dehumanized, degraded, to live in a condition in which their humanity is not only brought into question, but we live through the brutality of certain human beings' humanity being challenged. This led to me doing a lot of work on racism and also on communities who are challenged in such ways. So I looked at indigenous communities, First Nation communities, I looked at questions of sexuality and gender, in other words, the whole constellation of human sciences. But this question of the human sciences for me is not only in terms of looking into conditions of oppression, but it's also in terms of looking into the very question of how we go about producing knowledge itself. So I tend to look at three fundamental questions. Philosophical anthropology, what does it mean to be human? Philosophy of freedom, what does it mean for us to have responsibility for our existence? And what I call the metacritique of reason, or how do we justify or provide or even justify justification itself? How do we deal with the question of reason? Now, these tricky questions play themselves out in very concrete ways, and I'll give an example of this. You see, we often forget how much of the world we live in is an actual human world. And all kinds of things from laws to power to identity to all kinds of things that we bring together that affect us on a daily level is connected to what it is to be a human being. And I argue that a human being is not a thing like a cup or water or a particle just floating around. A human being, I argue in my writings, is a relationship. And as a relationship, when we relate to other human beings, we change the relationship we're in. And logically speaking, if we're in a change relationship and we are a relationship, we too go through changes. So in effect, we need to understand what it is to be part of a world that is connected to other human beings who produce meaning. Let me pick one example. If you look at me, you live in a world in which we think of people in black and white. We act as if people can be singularly one thing. Yet the human world is such that we can be absolutely more than one thing. And this sounds very hokey to many people, but it's something we should take very seriously. So some people who are looking at this may say, okay, there is a black man speaking. However, you may notice my hair, you may notice my hat, you may notice my attire, and some people say, well, maybe he's being a little funky, until you find out that this is a black Jewish man speaking. And some people treat a black Jewish man as if he cannot be both black and Jewish. Yet you can be 100% Jewish, your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. You can be 100% black, but what is that? Well, these percentage things don't really work for understanding what people are. But then if you stop there, you may have a misunderstanding of who I am, because I may be more. And I'll give you an example. My first trip to India, I got on a plane in New York City, and I was sitting next to an East Indian woman who was a graduate student at Purdue University, and she spoke with me, and we talked on the flight, and it was clear that she saw herself as an East Indian woman having a conversation with a black American. Then we landed in Abu Dhabi, and I got on a plane, and an old East Indian couple looked at me and smiled, and they said, "Coming home for the holidays?" And then I landed in Trivandrum, and when I landed in Trivandrum, I went to get a cab, and the dispatcher looked up and he said, "Are you Arab?" Now, I looked at him, I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, No, I thought you were Arab. Now, when I went to give my talk, I told the story of my trip, and what I said to the audience is, what each didn't realize is that all were true. I am a black person, and when I landed on my way to connect to India, I'm of Tamil background. I'm also a Tamil Indian. And when I landed in Trivandrum, the fact is the Jews I'm from are also Arab Jews. So I'm also an Arab person. And the problem in the world we live in is we fail to understand that all these identities are relationships to our ancestry, to our communities. If I decide, for instance, to join a community who may practice being Jewish in a different way, I become a member of new relationships. We live in a world that is very small. And I don't think many of us realize how tiny our planet is. It's like a speck of dust going around the sun. And in that speck of dust, we imagine ourselves as being so large, that the planet is so big. But the fact of the matter is this: we're on a planet of 8 billion people with technological resources to go and connect with each other very quickly, which means we live in this very small world. And you know what that means? It's a world in which we're going to be in contact with each other in ways that are going to establish new relationships. So my work is about, and I hope those who are listening could get some fruit from this, some benefit from this. It's about trying to understand how the human being in our relationships are also building new relationships in which there is possibility for the best of us as the species we are, and that to come.